Hey chess friends! In today's video we are going to be talking about the Caro Kann. Yes, it's my beginner's guide to the Caro Kann. I'm going to tell you the how, when, and why to play the Caro Kann, and I'm going to try to break it down and make it as easy to understand as possible. So let's get started. Let's talk about when you can play the Caro Kann. You can play the Caro Kann anytime you see the move 1e4. If they don't do the move 1e4, you probably shouldn't try to play the Caro Kann because it's not a Caro Kann. For instance, your opponent can play the move d4. You can play the move c6, expecting to get a Caro Kann, but they can play the move c4. And then when you play d5, this is not a Caro Kann, this is a Slav defense. And I realize you're saying, but I just played the Caro Kann. But that's not how openings work. Openings are a result of what you and your opponent are both doing. So since your opponent didn't play the move 1e4, this is not a Caro Kann. I could make an entire new video on that, so you'll just want to trust me for now. Let's talk about the mainline Caro Kann. The mainline Caro is the move e4, c6, d4. White is taking up space in the center, as we've been taught to do as beginners. We want to control the center if our opponent lets us. And we play the move d5, striking back in the center. We're providing a lot of tension here, and white has several options. The first thing that could happen at your level is that they will take. This is called the exchange. You recapture on d5 with your c-pawn, and we get this sort of structure here. What you might notice is that it's not completely symmetrical now. White has an open e-file, you have an open c-file. So that means that later on down the game, a lot of play for white probably might happen along this file. If they castle kingside, if they move their rook over, a lot of the play you can expect to happen on the e-file. Versus black here. Black has an open c-file, so a lot of the play from black you're going to arrange on the c-file. Maybe swing a rook or two over to the c-file, double the rooks on the c-file. That's where a lot of your plans are going to happen. A lot of times at a beginner level right now, you're going to get hit with the move bishop to b5, which looks really scary. They're attacking your king, and you're going to block it with the move knight to c6. Now, interestingly enough, it is very tempting on the next move to try to kick the bishop out with a move like a6. This actually, I've completely lost games this way. The reason being is that sometimes games are down to just one move, where if you make one mistake and lose one move at some point, like it's one of these things where, oh, I could have checkmated their king first if I had just had one more move. And sometimes, like at least once, this has been the move that has done it for me and caused me to lose the game. Crazy, I know, but the idea here is that there's no reason to provoke the bishop, because a lot of times, 9 times out of 10, they're going to take anyway. You can just go and do your own thing, and they'll just take anyway. And if you play the move a6 to provoke the bishop, but they take it anyway, then you've just wasted a move. So it's not even worth it. And you might say, like, well, but this feels really uncomfortable, this pressure on my king. Don't worry about it. We're just going to leave this here. We're going to continue our development, and once the king is out of the way, this is no longer pinned. If it's still, in fact, doing anything and still, you know, trying to pin that knight, it's not going to have a pin anymore. It's not going to work. So we don't want to expend a lot of extra energy to get rid of this. It's just going to make us fall behind. And let's say they do take. What's going to happen in that situation? Well, if they take, you're just going to have an open B file. So now your play, earlier we talked about that the C file sometimes opens up, and a lot of play happens on the C file in exchange variations, you know. So in this variation, this would just be an open B file. So you'd want to swing things around and take advantage of that B file. But let's get to some other variations on this that you'll end up seeing. From here, white plays the move knight to f3. Anytime this move happens and the e-pawn has been pushed, we want to always pin the knight here to the queen. The reason why we're pinning the knight in this situation is because it weakens d4. For instance, if we were able to get a knight onto c6 and get some more pieces situated so that they could attack d4, the knight would never be able to recapture, because then the queen would hang, so we're just utilizing that pin for later on. White could play the move h3. Whenever this move happens, we always want to take the knight. We just want to keep it simple and take the knight. The reason why we're taking the knight in this situation is because otherwise we're forced back into the corner with h5, bishop h5, and they can play the move g4, further forcing our bishop back. And if you look at the evaluation bar right now, Stockfish is saying that white has a serious advantage here. White has an advantage because they are taking up a whole bunch of space on the king side right now, and they basically got these moves for free because they were kicking our bishop around. And you might say it would be really horrible for white at this point if they moved this bishop out of the way and castled over here. That just looks horrible because of the lack of king safety in front of the king. But they don't have to do that. They can castle queenside, and you've just allowed your opponent to gobble up a whole bunch of space. So that's why we don't want to allow that to happen. Anytime our bishop gets threatened like this, we always just want to default to taking the knight on f3. If our bishop isn't threatened, though, we want to just maintain this pin as long as possible until it is threatened. So from here, perhaps they play the move bishop to d3. We want to always close up the pawn chain on e6. They can do some developing moves. We want to develop our king side so that we can castle as soon as possible. And in Caro Kann setups, the dark squared bishop usually wants to go to d6. This is the best square for it, just to give it all the most control of the board. It's a very versatile square. From here in this situation, anytime the queen's defense of this pawn is disconnected, we have to remember that we have a pin on this knight, so we want to move in. We want to strike, you know, blood's in the water, right? So we want to play the move c6 here. c6 just to apply more pressure to this pawn, because if they do nothing like this, we can just jump in and take that pawn. They can't recapture it, of course, because then they lose their queen. So let's say they defend the pawn instead. We want to move our knight out of the way, knight g to e7. This is not going to be the final position of this knight. We are probably going to develop it over to g6 or to f5. Those are very thematic places to develop the knight in Caro Kann structures. From this position here, we're going to develop our rook to c8 because we want something on this open file. Once this knight moves out of the way, this file will open up, and we want to castle kingside. The next line I'd like to discuss with you is called the advance. So in this line, we have 1e4. The next line we are going to discuss is called the advance. In this line, we get the move 1e4, 1c6, d4, d5, and this time white advances, hence why it's called the advance variation. They're playing the move e5. In this situation, I really like to strike back with an immediate c5, putting immediate pressure on this pawn here. White from here has a couple choices. They can take. This doesn't happen very often at beginner level, but in this event, if they take, we have to play the move e6 right away, immediately threatening this pawn. It can't be allowed to stay there. White may try to defend it with a move like b4. You can always play the move a5. They could try to strengthen the pawn chain even more and defend it, but if that happens, we can get into this situation, which is really nice for us, but all this depends on us playing e6 right from the beginning and immediately applying pressure over here to this pawn. But most likely your opponent will not take. They'll end up playing a move like knight to f3, just trying to defend. We're going to do our usual thing and get our light squared bishop over to g4 and pin that knight. That's going to be the theme here. And in this situation, your entire strategy is going to revolve around making this pawn fall. As soon as this pawn falls, if you can get this pawn to fall, this other pawn will fall as well, and everything in white's position will start crumbling. It all depends on taking out d4. But you don't want to do it too soon. There's no reason to strike right away. We want to just keep applying steady pressure on that square. So in this situation, white plays a move, and as soon as we move the bishop over here, we always want to be closing up our pawn chain with the move e6. The reason why we do this is if something happened, let's just say we lose the bishop, not that I'd ever recommend you to do something like that, and maybe we play a move like this. White actually has this really annoying move they can play e6 themselves instead of us. Now our only option really is to double up the pawns here, and this completely weakens things for our king. There's no way that our king is going to be able to castle kingside. We also have this bishop locked up. This double pawn here right on the e-file makes it really hard for us to develop at all, so we never want to put ourselves in a position where our opponent could do that to us. So that's why always, as soon as we get this bishop out, we always want to lock that pawn chain and get this chain in place. So where do we go from here? Well, there's several options, several things that could happen, right? They could play the move bishop to d3, in which case this is now a free pawn because they cut off the defense of the pawn from their queen, and the knight is pinned. So at this point, you know, we could take. They can never retake because they lose their queen. But let's say they don't play that move. Let's say they play a move like bishop to e2 instead. At this point, the threat that we had on the queen has ended, so we're no longer applying any pressure on the queen through that pin. So this bishop has done its job, and we can just take. And I believe this is either the best move or a really good move in this position. You can see that the evaluation bar shows that black is 1.3 ahead, which is insane because the pieces are equal, but it basically says we're a point ahead. It's just crazy. Now from here, we want to keep applying pressure to this piece. If they ever take now, that's fine for us because we get to develop our bishop basically for free, right? But otherwise, we want to keep applying pressure here. How do we apply more pressure here? A big thing in Caro Kann setups is for us to swing our knight over to f5. f5, once our knight gets to f5, it's going to apply more pressure here. We want to keep applying pressure to that d4 square. We want to bring eventually our queen can come over to b6, and we want to apply even more pressure to it. Okay, so we move our knight to e7 here. They will most likely castle, and then we can relocate our knight and put it on its final square, like where we want to develop it to. We're going to develop it to f5. So that's going to apply more pressure. And what you're going to see here, as I've said before, is eventually the pressure is going to be too much. They're not going to be able to properly defend this pawn, and eventually it's going to fall. But they can still try to hold on to it. They can play a move like bishop to e3. In this situation, we can just keep applying pressure. So now we're going to play knight to c6, applying even more pressure. Now look at how many pieces we have attacking this. That is not how pawns move, so don't pay attention to that. We have 1, 2, 3 attackers on this pawn. Right now they only have 2 defenders of it. So, and there's not really an easy way for them to get another defender. I suppose if we're being really inventive, they could play something like knight over here trying to defend it, but that just seems silly because we're going to end up kicking the knight out, and then it just goes back. And then finally, at this point, if this were to happen, we finally have enough pieces to finally play c takes d4. So now this is finally falling. We also, once it falls, there's now a fork between the bishop and the knight. So in this hypothetical situation, this is extra bad. They're going to lose something, so they'll probably have to take here. And then we really have a lot of choices. We can either take with the C knight or the F knight. I kind of like taking with the F knight because then the C knight is still hitting this loose pawn here, so we take this way. They have to be a little bit careful too, because we are possibly threatening something on c2 with this knight. Like, for instance, let's just say that it looks very natural, but let's just say the queen moves over here to e1 because it's trying to defend this pawn. Suddenly then we do hit them with this fork here, forking the queen and the rook, and then things are basically, it's game over. We haven't even castled yet, we haven't even finished our development yet, but it's still game over. So let's say instead of that situation, let's say instead they defend this pawn with rook to e1, which I feel like is a much better play. Then your plans from here are still going to be developing this this bishop. Probably bishop to b4 looks pretty good. I also could see bishop to c5 now. Just aiming it directly at this king, protecting the knight, like overprotecting the knight. We have other ideas here too. If the queen ever moves out of the way, I think taking that bishop off looks really good because if the queen moved, they'd have to recapture. Anytime you can wreck the pawn structure in front of your opponent's king, it's not going to be a bad idea. I mean, from here, this just looks amazing for black. Your plans from this point forward are going to be to castle your king to safety and put a rook probably on the c-file. And, I mean, we're already in such a way better position than our opponent. I mean, in this case, we've gotten a piece out of it already. We're a piece ahead, and the engine is saying that we have a 4.9 advantage on our opponent. So yeah, this is just completely crushing. Let's talk about another variation, because they don't have to play the advance here. Instead, they could play a move like knight to c3. Knight to c3 is the start of the Tartakower variation. Tartakower was a chess master. I can't remember what nationality he is, but hey, you become a chess master and you do some things, and you get openings named after you. That's wild. Okay, so in this situation, we actually want to go ahead and take. They'll retake, and we play knight to f6. From here, the most natural thing that's going to happen is they'll take your knight, and then we play e takes on f6, and this is the Tartakower variation. This is an actual very nasty variation for white to deal with. Yes, if you look at the eval bar, it looks completely equal, but this is amazing. From here, we're just going to get our bishop out of the way, either to e7 or to d6, and we're going to get castled, and we're going to put the rook on the e-file as quickly as possible. So let's just see how that might go down. Maybe they play something like this. We are going to get our bishop developed. Let's say they'll probably get their bishop developed somewhere, and we're going to immediately get castled. They can castle too, whatever, it's all good, but we are going to strike first, and we are going to control this e-file. Once we get to this point, we're going to do something that looks a little bit weird, especially as a beginner. You might not be used to some sort of maneuver like this. So we'll just have white do any old thing, and then we're actually going to start by moving the knight to d7. The idea of a move like this is that next we want to move our knight over to f8. And I know this looks really weird. Why would we go and maneuver our knight all the way around here? Well, the reason why is that our king is unassailable. Our king is just in a fortress that is almost impossible to break into. The knight here is defending some very important squares that is going to make it almost impossible for, for white to break in on the king's side over here. So once this happens, it's going to be very difficult for white to find any counterplay, really. I mean, I could see them maybe trying to take up some space on the queen side, so we need to develop this bishop. I'd probably say I don't want to put it on e6 because I don't want to disrupt our control over this file. And over here we have a bishop, so we can't put the bishop on f5. I'd probably put the bishop on g4, just go for this pin here. In this situation too, especially I could see at a beginner level, and when I was a beginner I had this happen before, I could definitely see a situation like them playing h3. And now I know in the past I've said if this bishop is ever threatened, you take here, but here I think we actually want to invite them wrecking their kingside pawn structure. So you'd play a move like bishop to h5 and just try to taunt them into playing g4 here. Eventually, relocating your bishop right in front of your king. Again, everything is so well defended over here. Like, you've got so many pieces along with your pawns in front of your king. And at this point, white has made a lot of vulnerabilities in front of their king that are going to pay off for you. You're going to be able to get your queen in there. You're going to be able to get your pieces in there because there's a lot of dark squared vulnerabilities now around their king. So I mean, you could even do something as simple as maybe trying to push the bishop back, get the queen in front, get a bishop queen, barrage happening on the king's side. Maybe try to get this knight out of the way so it's no longer defending. There's all kinds of things possible in this position, but the main thing is that even though the computer is saying that it's almost equal, objectively from especially a beginner intermediate level, this is just really hard to play as white, and black has a really cushy position. Alright, the last variation that I'm going to talk about is kind of a version of the exchange, but this is called the hillbilly attack. So, fun name. Here's how it goes. So, in the Hillbilly attack, which is you're very likely to face at a beginner level, starting with the move e4, of course, we play c6, and then they develop their bishop right away to c4. The idea being, of course, at this early level, it's very natural. They want to develop their bishop, they want to get their knight onto f3, or they want to develop their bishop and then get their queen on f3, and they want to go for, you know, a scholar's mate type attack. So it's super natural for this to happen, especially at a beginner level. In this situation, we're still going to play the move d5, and after e takes d and c takes d, look, it's pretty much the exchange variation, just a little bit different. From here, you can expect a couple different moves from your opponent. Likely, they will either move the bishop back to b3, in which case a lot of the themes, by the way, are going to still apply to the exchange variation. We have this open C file. We're going to make sure to use that later on. You know, if they move back like this, we'd want to defend, probably over-defend that pawn. Eventually, if they play their knight out, we still want to get over here and pin the knight. So a lot of the same themes, and then closing up the pawn chain. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is that once threatened here, they will just move their bishop to b5, in which case we know what we're doing. We're blocking it with the knight, and we're moving on with our day. You know, and the same themes apply as well. Next, if they develop their knight, we go ahead and pin the knight, okay? The knight is pinned. Once the bishop is outside the pawn chain, we go ahead and close it up with the move e6. So a lot of our, you know, we want to get our bishop to d6. Our knight over here, depending on what's happening, presumably at some point they're going to play the move d4. Guess what? That is still going to be something that we can try to target. So we can play moves like knight to e7, trying to get it to f5. So a lot of the themes, even though sometimes the move orders change, a lot of the themes in the Caro end up being the same. Going back real quick, I did want to cover what happens if they don't play the knight to f3. Because, I mean, if you played the bishop over here and the knight wasn't on f3, then the queen would just take it, or they could, you know, block it. What happens if the knight doesn't come to f3? Well, eventually, in my experience, I really like to delay a little bit to see if I can get them to play that move. So, like, in this sort of situation, maybe I would start off with playing my knight to f6 like this, waiting around and seeing if they're going to play the move knight to f3 so that we can pin it. But if that doesn't come, you know, if it doesn't look like they're going to play that way, we can also go ahead and let's just make a move. We can also put the bishop on f5. That's also a perfectly normal square for the bishop to go on in Caro Kann structures. Same deal after that. We're going to play the move e6, lock it outside the pawn structure. We get this really nice pawn chain, and then a lot of our ideas are going to be exactly the same. We're going to get this bishop out. We're going to castle. We're going to get a rook on the c file. Yeah, so pretty standard stuff. Alright, that's going to do it for today's video on the Caro Kann. So the big thing is, just make sure to keep that pawn structure intact. Don't push pawns in front of your king. If anything, push them on the queen side away from your king. A lot of times those are going to be minority attacks on the queen side. So just make sure to keep that pawn structure in front of your king as solid as possible. We work so hard for that pawn chain towards the center. We want to keep that, alright? Yeah, otherwise, let me know how it goes with your Caro Kann games. I would love to see some of your games. You can always message me in the comments here, or on chess.com, LeeChess, wherever you happen to find me. Yeah. If you found this helpful, please like, comment, and subscribe. Do all those 3 things so that the YouTube algorithm thinks that I'm important and puts me in front of your eyeballs. Alright, thanks again. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye!